The first cut didn't come from a knife. It came from my husband's voice. "Pack your bags, Amara. We're done here." The words floated over the clink of glasses and the soft violin music before slamming into my chest. For a heartbeat, the party kept moving around me, laughter, the pop of a champagne cork, Eleanor's friends arguing over which flavor the cake was, until the violinist missed a note and silence rippled through the room like a shockwave. 60 people turned to stare. We were in Eleanor's living room, the one she'd spent an entire week bragging about redecorating, just in time for my big birthday. Gold balloons arched over the mantel. A chandelier threw diamond-like light over the polished floor. The cake was a three-tiered monument to sugar and ego, sitting untouched on the mahogany table. And in the middle of all that glitter, my husband sat in his wheelchair like a tragic prince holding court. Richard's suit was custom-tailored, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair combed with the kind of care he never used to bother with at home. The wheelchair had been polished too, I'd watched him insist on it. Now he gripped the armrests like they were a throne's carved handles, chin tipped up, soaking in every sympathetic murmur. Eleanor, perched on the edge of the sofa, looked delighted. She didn't even bother hiding it. Her red dress matched the flush of satisfaction in her cheeks as she watched me try to remember how to breathe. I realized I was still holding my champagne flute. My fingers were trembling so badly the bubbles shivered. "Richard, what are you talking about?" I managed. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He gave me that bored, rehearsed stare I'd come to recognize over the last year. "Don't make a scene, Amara. This marriage has been over for a long time. I'm just finally saying it out loud." A nervous titter of laughter broke somewhere near the back of the room. One of his cousins muttered, "Wow," under his breath. "I've spent 3 years taking care of you," I said, the words scraping out of my throat. "I left my career. My life. For you." He laughed, sharp and glassy. "You chose that. I never asked you to give up anything. You liked playing the martyr." The lie hung between us, heavy and foul. Everyone in that room knew it wasn't true. They'd seen me racing to the hospital the night of his accident. They'd watched me will him into rehab, sit through appointments, argue with insurance agents on speakerphone. They'd seen me push his chair up Eleanor's front steps with sweat running down my back while he stared pointedly at his phone. But none of them said a word. From the corner of my eye, I saw motion near the fireplace. Rebecca, Richard's physical therapist, in a dress that looked more gala than family birthday, had stepped up beside Eleanor. Her mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. It was closer to satisfaction. Of course she was standing there. Front row seats to the execution she'd helped stage. "Darling," Eleanor chimed in, her voice dipped in the kind of sugar that rots teeth, "this is very uncomfortable for everyone. It's better to do these things quickly." She turned to her oldest son. "James, why don't you help Amara to her car? She must be overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. That was one word for it. There was a buzzing in my ears, a high-pitched whine drowning out the whispers, the gasps, the quiet little, "I knew it," s floating through the crowd. I could feel every pair of eyes on the pink dress I'd chosen so carefully that morning, wanting to look appropriate and supportive for Eleanor's big night. Instead, I'd been dressed up for a public dumping. Eleanor wanted me escorted out like an embarrassing guest who'd had too much to drink. Richard wanted to watch me crumble in front of his entire family. Rebecca wanted to see me leave so she could slide neatly into the space I'd spent 3 years bleeding to fill. My phone buzzed in my clutch. The sound was small, almost lost under the murmur of the room, but it cut through the fog in my head like a clean line of light. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing. Feeling every ounce of humiliation, every stare, every smirk. Feeling the version of me they all thought they knew, the exhausted, grateful, endlessly forgiving caregiver, stretched like an old skin I'd finally outgrown. Then I remembered what that buzz meant. Weeks of quietly following paper trails and half-deleted emails. Nights staring at surveillance photos I was never meant to see. The video of Richard walking through a hotel lobby with Rebecca's hand hooked casually through his arm. My fingers stopped shaking. "Actually," I said, slipping the clutch open, "I'm not going anywhere." "Not yet." "Amara," Richard warned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, "don't be dramatic. Let's handle this like adults." I ignored him and scrolled to the number labeled Nathan Patterson, private investigator. The room hushed again as I lifted the phone to my ear. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. "Patterson Investigations," came the calm voice on the other end. "Hi, Mr. Patterson. It's Amara Johnson." I could hear my own heartbeat, steady now. "Yes. It's happening exactly like we thought. You can come in tonight, and bring everything." I didn't need to put the call on speaker. The silence in that room was so complete that everyone might as well have been pressed to the phone with me. Even the catering staff had frozen, trays suspended mid-air. I ended the call and slid the phone back into my clutch. Then I looked at Richard. At Rebecca. At Eleanor, whose smile had faltered for the first time all evening. I set my champagne glass on the nearest table with a gentle tap that sounded, at least to me, like the start of a countdown. "Since we're making announcements tonight," I said quietly, "let's make sure we all hear the full story. Then we can decide who really needs to pack their bags." A murmur rippled through the guests. A few people actually leaned forward, their curiosity outweighing their discomfort. Someone in the back lifted their phone, already recording, as if they sensed this was the kind of moment people would be replaying for a long time. Richard opened his mouth to snap back, but I barely heard him. Because underneath the fear and fury, something else was rising in me, something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. 3 years ago, I would have crumpled on the spot. 3 years ago, I believed love meant emptying myself out for someone else until there was almost nothing left. I believed that if you just gave enough, sacrificed enough, stayed loyal enough, the universe would eventually reward you. That version of me died slowly, on hospital chairs, in rehab waiting rooms, in the quiet hours when everyone else went home and I stayed. The woman standing in Eleanor's living room now? She'd been forged in something much sharper. And if you want to understand how I got from that Tuesday afternoon, pitching a campaign in a glass conference room, to this birthday party where my husband tried to discard me like yesterday's gift bag, we have to go back. Back to the first phone call that changed everything. The one from the hospital, not the private investigator. Before we begin, tap subscribe so you never miss the next story. 3 years earlier, none of this existed, not the private investigator, not the surveillance photos, not the quiet steel in my voice at Eleanor's party. Back then, there was only another phone call. I was standing in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor, talking a group of executives through a product launch that was supposed to make my career. The city was spread out behind them in clean lines of steel and sunlight. My slides were up on the massive screen. I just hit the part where I usually won people over: numbers, proof, the climb in market share if they followed my plan. My phone buzzed once in my blazer pocket. I ignored it. Everyone in my life knew I didn't answer during presentations. It buzzed again. And again. A third vibration, then a fourth, insistent enough that the woman in the front row glanced at my jacket like she could feel it too. "Apologies," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's jump to the timeline." The buzzing stopped. Then started again, this time with a different tone. Unknown number. Something in my stomach dropped. "Give me 1 second," I said, already reaching for my phone. "I'm so sorry, there's a family." I didn't finish the sentence. "Mrs. Johnson," a man's voice said the moment I answered. "This is Dr. Mitchell from County General. Your husband, Richard Johnson, has been in a car accident. He's in surgery. I need you to come to the hospital immediately." The room tilted. The neat line of suits and notepads blurred into a smear. Is he alive?" I asked. "Yes," the doctor said. "But there's been trauma to his spine. We'll know more after the operation. How soon can you get here?" "I'm on my way." I hung up without explaining, without picking up the notes that had scattered when my hands shook. A dozen executives watched me rush out in stunned silence, but in that moment, the campaign, the promotion, the years I'd spent fighting for that seat at the table, all of it felt irrelevant compared to the image of Richard alone in a cold, bright operating room. He didn't look like my husband when I first saw him. He looked like a stranger someone had constructed out of gauze and tubes and bruises. Machines hummed around his bed, the faint green line on the monitor traced his heartbeat in jagged strokes. A nurse warned me about the swelling, the stitches, the neck brace, but none of it really prepared me. "Richard," I whispered, taking his hand. It was the only part of him that looked familiar. His eyelids fluttered. When he finally focused on me, tears spilled over, wetting the corners of his eyes. "I can't feel my legs, Mara," he choked out. "They said I might not walk again." My throat closed. I squeezed his hand harder. "Then we figure it out," I said. "Whatever it takes, we figure it out." I meant it. Every word. I didn't know yet how much "whatever it takes" would cost me. The first weeks blurred into a rigid routine: ICU, surgery updates, Eleanor arriving in a cloud of perfume and panic, doctors explaining spinal cord damage with careful, measured sentences. "There's a chance," one surgeon said, his voice kind but honest. "Physical therapy, time, determination, it's possible he could regain some function. But you should prepare yourselves. His mobility may be permanently limited." Eleanor sobbed into a lace handkerchief. Richard stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched. I nodded, because someone had to absorb the information without shattering. At first, there were small victories. Richard wiggling one toe. Richard pushing himself up a few centimeters with his arms. Richard managing a transfer from bed to wheelchair with less assistance than the week before. We celebrated them all like they were Olympic medals. I took a leave of absence from work. The firm was supportive, up to a point. Take the month, my manager said over the phone. We'll hold your projects. Family comes first. 1 month became 2. 2 spilled into 3. Somewhere between the 3rd insurance appeal and the 10th therapy session, someone in HR called with a voice full of practiced sympathy. We'll have to make your role available again, Amara. When you're ready to come back, we'll find a place for you. It just might not be this one. Translation: the promotion track I'd been on since my 20s had evaporated. I sat in the parking lot outside the rehab center, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the dashboard while Richard laughed weakly at something his therapist had said inside. Take it, he told me later, when I explained through exhausted tears. Go back. I'll manage. We need the money. He said it like it was simple. Like he hadn't needed me to help him shower that morning, or to lift his legs into bed the night before when his muscles spasmed so hard he cried out. I can't leave you alone 10 hours a day, I said. What if you fall? What if you need? I'm not helpless, he snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry. I hate feeling like I'm dragging you down. You're not, I said automatically. But the truth was, the decision had already been made before either of us said anything out loud. The next day, I sent my resignation email from my phone in the rehab waiting room while Richard slept through another round of pain medication. I watched my signature disappear from the bottom of the message as I hit send, like watching someone else's name slip away. It was supposed to be temporary. We both told ourselves that. Life shrank. Our world became appointments, pill timers, insurance forms, the careful choreography of wheelchair ramps and accessible bathrooms. I learned how to transfer him from chair to couch without hurting his back. I learned how to roll him in his sleep to avoid pressure sores, how to argue with pharmacy techs who claimed a medication refill hadn't gone through. Friends called for a while. We said, maybe next week, so many times that eventually they stopped asking. My family lived across the country, flights were expensive, and the idea of leaving Richard for even a weekend made my chest vice-tight. People praised me constantly. You're an angel, the neighbor across the street would say as I wrestled the wheelchair out of the trunk. I don't know how you do it, a nurse commented once. A lot of spouses don't stay. I'd smile until my cheeks ached, say something about love and vows and, in sickness and in health, then go home and scrub dishes so hard my fingers pruned, just to bleed some of the restless energy out of my system. Because there was never a space for the darker feelings. The ones that crept in at 3 in the morning when Richard finally snored and the house was quiet, resentment, grief for the life I'd almost had, the tiny, treacherous thought of what my career would look like if the phone had never rung that Tuesday. So I buried them. I told myself this was what good wives did. They stayed. They adapted. They made themselves small enough to fit into whatever shape their husband's life demanded. Richard changed too. Sometimes the old him came back, sarcastic, quick-witted, making jokes with the nurses, flirting shamelessly just to watch me roll my eyes. Other days, he was a stranger. Snapping over minor things. Going silent for hours. Staring at his useless legs like they'd personally betrayed him. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered once, not to me but to the empty room, thinking I couldn't hear. None of us had, I thought. But I was the only one who'd voluntarily turned my whole life inside out. The money became another weight. The insurance payout from the accident helped for a while. His disability checks started coming in. I picked up freelance consulting work when I could squeeze it between med schedules and paperwork. But it was a fraction of what I used to make. Eleanor contributed when it suited her image. She loved to tell anyone who would listen how her son had been so tragically injured, and how his incredible wife had sacrificed everything to care for him. She'd pat my hand with that dry, perfumed fingers touch and say things like, "We're so lucky you're such a devoted girl," as if devotion were a personality flaw she'd decided to tolerate. Sometimes she'd slip us a check with a flourish, making sure to mention it at every family gathering afterward. "We're all doing what we can," she'd say, as if we were equal players in this game and not living in the house Richard and I could barely afford to keep. I swallowed my pride and cashed every one. If the story had stopped there, if Richard had stayed the man crying in that hospital bed, broken but honest, maybe everything would have been different. But people adapt in strange ways. About 18 months in, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A joke here, a flicker there. I noticed he'd time certain movements, leaning forward to grab something, to when my back was turned, pulling himself upright with a strength he pretended he didn't have when anyone else was watching. I caught him once standing halfway in the doorway, using his arms to brace himself on the frame, weight clearly on his legs for a second before he collapsed back into the chair with an exaggerated groan when he realized I was in the hallway. "You okay?" I'd asked. "Muscle spasm," he said immediately, as if he'd been waiting with an excuse ready. I wanted to believe him. So I did. Then came the therapy appointments. "Rebecca says we should add another session a week," he told me one morning, scrolling through his phone. "She found some new technique we should try." Rebecca was his new physical therapist, young, brilliant, relentlessly optimistic. She'd replaced Tom when he moved clinics. The first time I met her, she'd hugged me like we were already best friends and called me our MVP caregiver. At first, I was grateful to her. Richard seemed lighter after their sessions, almost energized. He started dressing better, caring about his hair again, asking me to pick up specific colognes he felt like trying. Then, one Tuesday, he mentioned a last-minute evening appointment with Rebecca at the rehab center. "I don't remember seeing that on the schedule," I said, rinsing a plate. "She squeezed me in," he replied. "Can you drop me off at 6? I did. I watched him roll through the automatic doors, greeted by a receptionist who waved like she knew him well. An hour later, I realized he'd left his medication organizer in the car. Cursing under my breath at the traffic, I turned around and drove back. It was only when I walked into the rehab lobby, pillbox in hand, that I felt the first real crack in the story I'd built around us. The waiting area was quiet. The receptionist looked up, confused. "Back again?" she asked. "Did you forget something?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "My husband's pills. Richard Johnson. He's here with Rebecca for a 6 o'clock. Her brow furrowed. "Richard doesn't have a session today," she said. "Rebecca's off on Tuesdays. She only sees him on Thursdays now." For a split second, I thought I'd misheard. "Are you sure?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. The schedule was clear. No appointment. No Rebecca. No Richard. The pillbox grew heavy in my hand. "Oh," I said, my voice sounding oddly bright to my own ears. "Must have gotten the days mixed up. Thanks." I walked back to the car on legs that didn't feel like they belonged to me, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the rehab center's front doors. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. No Richard. No wheelchair. No husband. Somewhere between the time I dropped him off and the moment I realized he wasn't where he said he'd be, the story I'd built around my marriage shifted from tragedy to something else entirely. Later, I would trace everything back to that night. To the uneaten sandwich on the passenger seat. To the empty ramp. To the quiet realization that if Richard wasn't in therapy, he was somewhere else. And whoever he was there with knew something about my husband I didn't. That was the first time the word fraud ever crossed my mind. I didn't know yet how right I was. But that was the crack. The party at Eleanor's? That was just where the whole facade finally collapsed. The first time I thought the word fraud, it felt disloyal. The second time, it felt like oxygen. For 2 weeks after that night at the rehab center, I pretended nothing had changed. I still woke Richard up with his morning meds and a glass of water. I still helped him transfer from bed to wheelchair, even though I started noticing how little strain he showed when he pulled himself along. I still pushed his chair down the ramp, loaded it into the trunk, scheduled his appointments. On the surface, life went on. Underneath, I watched. It's amazing how different someone looks when you stop filling in the blanks for them. The stories I'd been telling myself for 3 years, he's trying his best, he's just depressed, he's doing all he can started to sound hollow, like lines from a movie I'd seen too many times. He dropped a remote one afternoon. It bounced under the coffee table. "Could you get that?" he asked, gesturing vaguely. I waited. For a moment, he glanced at me, then at the remote, calculating. Then he leaned down, further than he ever did when a nurse was around, and hooked it with his fingertips, using a subtle push from his legs to shift his weight. The movement was small. Precise. Effortless. He caught me watching and immediately grimaced, grabbing his thigh. "Spasm," he said. "Hurts today." "Right," I said. "Of course." My voice sounded normal. My heart was beating so hard it made my ribs ache. I started keeping a notebook. Not because I had a plan yet, but because I didn't trust my own memory anymore. Dates. Times. Little things that didn't fit. Thursday, said therapy ran over. Came home smelling like hotel soap, not disinfectant star. Saturday, moved legs in sleep. Reflex? Or something else? Monday, rehab receptionist confirmed again, no Tuesday appointments. The list grew. So did the distance between us. He seemed lighter. Happier. Like someone who'd gotten away with something and was basking in the afterglow. "Maybe I'm turning a corner," he said one night, scrolling on his phone. "Maybe this is acceptance. You know, the final stage." I looked at the way his shoulders moved, the strength in his arms. I thought about the silent, empty rehab center. Yeah, I said softly. Maybe. I didn't set out to hire a private investigator. At first, I just tried to outrun the gnawing in my gut with Google searches. Can paralyzed people move their legs in sleep? How common is psychosomatic paralysis? Can depression cause someone to exaggerate symptoms? I wanted a medical explanation, a psychological one, anything that didn't spell out the uglier word forming in the back of my mind. Instead, I stumbled onto forums. Partners describing spouses who'd faked injuries for attention, for money, for sympathy. Stories of insurance scams, staged accidents, disability benefits collected for years after quiet recoveries. Therapists talking about malingering in clinical terms. The patterns were uncomfortably familiar: sudden secretive behavior, mismatched appointment times, families kept in the dark. One paragraph in particular stuck with me: if you suspect fraud, don't confront them without evidence. They'll just tighten control and paint you as unstable. Document. Verify. Get help. Get help came with a list of suggestions: lawyers, victim advocates, private investigators. 2 days later, I sat in a corner booth of a small coffee shop, notebook in my purse and my hands wrapped around a mug I'd forgotten to drink from, waiting for a man named Nathan Patterson. He arrived exactly on time. He didn't look like a TV detective. No trench coat, no dramatic sunglasses. Just a man in his 40s with kind eyes, a slightly crooked tie, and a leather satchel that had clearly seen better days. "Mrs. Johnson?" he asked. "Amara," I corrected automatically. My voice shook just enough to annoy me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course." He slid into the seat opposite me. "You said it was about your husband?" I nodded, suddenly unsure where to start. My husband might be faking paralysis felt too big to say out loud in public. "I think he's lying about his disability," I said anyway. The words dropped between us like a stone. "I just don't know how much, or why." Nathan didn't flinch. That helped. "Okay," he said. "Tell me what makes you think that." So I did. I told him about the rehab schedule that didn't exist. The movements I'd seen. The way Richard's mood had shifted from despair to something like smugness. The money that never seemed to stretch as far as it should, despite the insurance payout, the disability checks, Eleanor's dramatic contributions. I told him about 3 years of caregiving, because it felt important, and about the one moment in a lobby when a receptionist's confusion had cracked everything open. He listened without interrupting, only occasionally jotting something in a small notebook. When I finished, he sat back. "Here's what I can tell you," he said. "What you're describing is not uncommon. Disability and insurance fraud are big business. If he's faking or exaggerating, and if he's collecting benefits based on that, it's not just lying. It's a crime." The word made my stomach twist. Crime. "So what happens if I'm wrong?" I asked. "Then I'll have some very boring footage of a man in a wheelchair," he said calmly. "You'll have peace of mind. No one needs to know you even asked." "And if I'm right?" He folded his hands on the table. "Then we'll have proof. Video, photos, records. Enough to show law enforcement, your lawyer, whoever needs to see it." My job is to gather information, Amara, not to tell you what to do with it. But if he's running a scam, you deserve to know exactly how deep it goes before you make any decisions. I stared at the scratched surface of the table. What do you need from me? I asked. His schedule. Addresses. Any paperwork you can find, insurance documents, disability filings, bank statements. And, Nathan hesitated, choosing his words. If you can keep acting like nothing's wrong while we do this, it will make my job a lot easier. People who think they're safe get careless. Keep pretending. I'd been doing that for years. This would just be a different kind. Okay, I said. Do it. Nathan nodded once. One more thing, he added. If this points to fraud on a larger scale, insurance companies, government benefits, medical professionals, I may loop in some federal contacts. You're not the only person who gets hurt in these schemes. It would be weeks before I understood exactly what he meant. The first photos arrived 3 days later. Nathan didn't send them by email. He'd insisted on in-person meetings only, for your safety and mine. So I found myself back in our corner booth, heart hammering as he slid a manila envelope across the table. I started with the basics, he said. You said he had a Tuesday appointment with his therapist at the rehab center. He left the house at 5:40. You dropped him off at 6. Here's what happened next. I opened the envelope. The first photo showed Richard at the rehab center entrance, just where I'd left him. The second, taken 15 minutes later, showed him rolling away from the automatic doors in the opposite direction, toward the side of the building. The third stopped my breath. Richard stood beside a silver sedan, bracing one hand lightly on the hood, the other, on his hip. His full weight was clearly on his legs. The wheelchair sat empty a few feet away, like a prop forgotten after a play. He lifted himself into the driver's seat, Nathan said quietly. Put the wheelchair in the trunk. Drove off. The next set of photos proved it. Richard driving down the street. Richard parking outside a cafe. Richard walking, walking, inside, no cane, no limp, shoulders rolled back with the swagger of someone who'd spent 3 years perfecting a lie and was now enjoying the freedom of slipping out of it. My fingers dug into the glossy paper. Keep going, I said. There were more. Richard at a boutique hotel downtown, holding the door open with his back so he could pull a suitcase behind him. Richard in the lobby, standing close to Rebecca in a cocktail dress, their heads bent together over a phone, laughing. Richard on a grainy security still, dancing with her under low orange lights, his hand resting comfortably on the small of her back as they moved in a slow circle. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit Nathan's notebook. How long? I asked. From what I can tell, he regained significant mobility at least 18 months ago, Nathan said. His medical file, he tapped another folder, shows a physical therapy report noting substantial improvement around that time. The recommendation was to transition to outpatient strengthening and gradually increase weight bearing. That's not what he told you? No, I said hoarsely. He said progress was slow. That he might never walk unaided. That the disability checks were all we had. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something in his jaw tightened. I pulled financials where I could, he continued. Here's the overview. He slid a printed spreadsheet to me. Numbers. Columns. Balances. Disability payments, insurance settlements, government assistance, he said. Those are here. But he also set up a consulting LLC 18 months ago. Remote work. All fees routed to an account you're not on. He's been making more than enough to live on without your freelance work or his mother's contributions. I stared at the total. Nearly $200,000 in combined benefits and secret income. For a man who'd been telling me we were broke. Is it all legal? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not if he represented himself as permanently disabled while hiding recovery, Nathan said. Not if he failed to report additional income on forms that require it. That's where the fraud part comes in. I thought of every late bill, every argument over gas prices, every time he'd refused to hire a home aide because it was too expensive, leaving me to handle his care alone. I felt like I was going to be sick. And Rebecca? I asked. The name tasted bitter. Nathan opened another folder. That's where my federal friends come in, he said. Your husband didn't just pick a random therapist for his little side project. Rebecca Grant has been on the radar for a while. She's been connected to suspicious disability cases in 3 different clinics. Patients with sudden, dramatic injuries followed by miraculous private, rehab and long-term payouts. She's scamming them? I asked. She's helping them scam, Nathan corrected. For a cut. She falsifies progress notes. Confirms limitations that no longer exist. In one case, she coached a patient on how to fail reflex tests convincingly. The feds have been building a case, but it's hard to nail down without a cooperative witness or a really stupid mistake. So I married the stupid mistake, I said. Nathan almost smiled. Let's just say your husband isn't as careful as he thinks he is, he replied. Which brings us to the bigger question, what do you want to do with this? I stared at the pile of evidence between us, photos of a man who could walk, dance, drive, spreadsheets proving he'd hidden money, notes about an affair conducted under the guise of therapy. What did I want? The answer was complicated and simple at the same time. I want the truth out, I said. All of it. Not just for me, for everyone he lied to. His family. The people paying for his benefits. The next woman Rebecca tries to pull into this. I want his mask ripped off in front of the same people he's been performing for. Nathan nodded slowly. In that case, he said, we don't just hand this to a prosecutor quietly and let it vanish into paperwork. We let him expose himself. Publicly. How? I asked. He tapped the evidence with one finger. We give him exactly what he wants, he said. A stage. An audience. And a chance to feel invincible one last time. The opportunity arrived in the form of a white and gold invitation card. Eleanor Johnson invites you to celebrate her 65th birthday. There was an embossed chandelier on the front. Of course there was. She's been planning it for months, Richard said, wheeling into the kitchen with the card balanced on his lap. Big family event. She wants everyone there. Think you can manage catering details? You know how she gets. I turned the card over in my hands. The date glinted in foil. I didn't have to force the smile this time. Sure, I said. I'll make sure it's a night none of us forget. That afternoon, I took the invitation to Nathan. He studied it like a blueprint. Lots of guests, he murmured. Private home, but big enough that no one can control every angle. People will be filming, posting. If anything happens, it'll spread fast. You can get your investigators inside? I asked. Already working on it, he said. I'll coordinate with Agent Rodriguez on the federal side. If we time this right, they can be nearby, paperwork ready. Your call is the trigger. My call. The idea of it settled into my bones like something inevitable. In the weeks leading up to the party, we prepared. Nathan refined the evidence, cross-checking records, getting statements from clinic staff, pulling additional footage from parking lot cameras and hotel security systems. Every new piece made the story clearer. Richard hadn't stumbled into deceit. He'd constructed an entire life around it. I prepared too. A new email account in my maiden name. A separate bank account Eleanor didn't know about. A quiet interview with a former colleague who'd reached out about a consulting role, surprised but pleased to hear from me. "You're really ready to come back?" she asked. Yes, I said, and for the first time in years, it felt true. At home, I played my old role to perfection. I filled pill boxes. I scheduled the fake therapy appointments he never attended. I nodded sympathetically when he complained about constant pain and how hard it all is. I pretended not to notice the tension in his shoulders when his phone buzzed with texts from R, which I now knew was Rebecca, not some random friend from college. Eleanor called almost daily to fuss over party details. "Wear something nice, darling," she said once. "We'll have important guests there. I want you looking presentable." She didn't have to say grateful. It was implied. I agreed to everything. Catering. Music. Seating charts. Every yes felt like another stitch in the net we were weaving. The night before the party, the house felt different. Richard was almost giddy, rolling around making calls, checking with the florist about Eleanor's centerpieces, confirming the arrival time for the violinist. He'd been more attentive than usual all week, complimenting my hair, asking about my day, like a guilty man trying to soften the blow of something he'd already decided to do. Rebecca texted once while he was in the shower. Her name lit up the screen before it locked. Asterisk tomorrow. Can't wait to see her face, asterisk. My hands curled into fists. I didn't unlock the phone. I didn't need to. I knew exactly which her they meant. Upstairs, I laid out the dress I'd chosen, the soft pink gown with the delicate floral detailing that Eleanor had always said made me look too young for her son. I paired it with simple earrings, modest heels. Armor disguised as elegance. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection looked almost like the woman I'd been before the accident, poised, composed, eyes sharp instead of hollow. Richard wheeled in, towel draped over his shoulders. "You're really pulling out all the stops for Mom," he said, eyeing the dress. "She'll love that." "Oh, I'm sure she will," I replied. He rolled closer, lowering his voice. "Tomorrow's important," he said. "Let's just get through it without drama, okay? We can talk about us after. In private." There it was. the faintest hint of the script he and Eleanor had rehearsed. I smiled, slow and calm. "Of course," I said. "Tomorrow will be the last day I let you lie to me." He laughed, thinking it was a joke. I turned back to the mirror, watching his reflection as he wheeled out, humming under his breath. Tomorrow, I thought, touching the edge of the dress. Tomorrow, the man who spent 3 years pretending he couldn't stand was going to expose himself in front of everyone he'd ever fooled. He just didn't know it yet. The morning of Eleanor's party dawned bright and ordinary, which felt like an insult. Richard ate the breakfast I made him, texting between bites, grinning at messages he never let me see. Eleanor called twice to confirm nothing tragic would interfere with her big night. I packed my clutch with lipstick, tissues, and the small, silent weight of my phone. By 6:30, we were rolling up her driveway. The house glowed like it had been dipped in champagne, windows lit, music spilling faintly through the walls, balloons bobbing at the entrance. Guests' cars lined the street. I helped Richard out of the car, my hands steady on the wheelchair handles. "You ready?" he asked, looking up at me, smug and excited. "You have no idea," I thought. "Always," I said. Inside, the living room had been transformed. Crystal chandelier blazing, gold happy birthday banner stretched across the ceiling, flowers on every flat surface. A violinist played near the fireplace. The 3-tier cake Eleanor had bragged about sat on its own table like a minor royal. Cousins and friends swarmed Richard the moment we entered. "There's our hero," someone said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Such a fighter," another murmured. Rebecca appeared in a dark red dress that technically covered everything but managed to feel indecent anyway. She leaned over to hug Richard from behind, her hand lingering a beat too long on his chest. "Big night," she whispered. "You okay?" "Never better," he said, eyes flicking to me with a challenge. I smiled as if I hadn't seen the surveillance photos of them dancing in a hotel lobby. Nathan and the 2 investigators he'd brought, introduced to Eleanor earlier as friends from the charity board, mingled near the back wall, indistinguishable from the other men in suits. Agent Rodriguez, in a simple navy dress with nothing marking her as federal anything, chatted casually with a group near the bar. If you didn't know what was coming, you'd think it was just another party. Eleanor clinked her glass with a fork. "Everyone," she called, beaming. "If I could have your attention for just a moment." The violinist trailed off. Conversations quieted. I felt the room tilt toward her. "I want to thank you all for being here," she said. "This year has been challenging. But seeing my son's courage, and his beautiful wife's devotion." She reached down, squeezing my shoulder just a bit too hard. "Has reminded me what family really means. Richard has something he'd like to say." He took the cue like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Which, knowing him, he probably had. He cleared his throat, projecting his voice just enough to reach the corners of the room. "Mom's right," he began. "This year has shown me who really stands by you when things fall apart." He paused for effect, letting people murmur their agreement. "For 3 years," he continued, "I've tried to hold our life together. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit when something's over." He turned in his chair to face me fully. "Pack your bags, Amara," he said, every syllable crisp. "We're done here." Gasps. A dropped glass. the violinist missing a note. If anyone had been watching closely, they would have noticed his hands trembling more than mine. We'd been here before, in a way, the humiliation, the eyes, the weight of Eleanor's delighted stare. But this time, there was a difference. This time, I wasn't the only one taking notes. I let the silence stretch, let every person in that room soak in his cruelty. Then I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and dialed. "Amara," he snapped, "don't." "Hello, Mr. Patterson," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Yes. It's time. We're ready for you. Bring everything." The shift in the air was almost physical. Conversations died mid-whisper. Even the catering staff froze, sensing in that animal way that something larger than birthday drama had just walked in. Nathan appeared at my side within seconds, as if he'd stepped out of the wallpaper. Behind him, the two suited investigators straightened, their casual smiles gone. Agent Rodriguez moved closer to the center of the room, producing a slim leather wallet from her bag. "Richard Johnson?" Nathan said, voice carrying just enough. Richard tried to laugh. "What is this, Amara?" he demanded. "Are you trying to embarrass yourself more?" Eleanor stepped forward, bristling. "This is my birthday party," she said. "Whatever marital issues you two have can be dealt with somewhere else." "I'm afraid this isn't just a marital issue, ma'am," Nathan replied politely. "Nathan Patterson. I've been conducting an investigation into your son's activities over the last 18 months. A murmur rolled through the guests. "Activities?" Eleanor repeated, color draining from her face. "What are you talking about?" Agent Rodriguez flipped open her wallet, letting the gold badge catch the chandelier light. "Agent Maria Rodriguez, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said calmly. "We've been coordinating with Mr. Patterson. We'll need everyone to remain where they are." The room went still. Rebecca's smile slid off her face like someone had wiped it away. "FBI?" Richard scoffed, though his voice cracked on the last letter. "For what? For being in a wheelchair?" "No," Nathan said. "For pretending to be." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a sleek tablet, tapping a few times before turning it to face the room. The first video clip appeared on the screen. Security footage, wide angle, timestamped in the corner, CAM 07, 2024.03.1509:47:12. Richard, unmistakably Richard, walked across a marble lobby carrying two suitcases, his gait steady. Behind him, Rebecca pushed an empty wheelchair. The image punched a hole in the room. "No," Eleanor whispered. "That's not," Richard sputtered. "That's old footage. Before the accident." Nathan swiped. A second clip, Richard parking his car outside the rehab center, getting out, unfolding the wheelchair, then slumping into it with theatrical effort before rolling toward the entrance. A third, grainy hotel security video of him dancing with Rebecca, no assistance, no visible struggle, turning her under his arm with a flourish. "This is all fabricated," he shouted, panic rising. "You can't trust." "There are more," Nathan said. "Dozens of clips, witnesses, medical records documenting your recovery. Records that mysteriously never made it into your disability filings." Agent Rodriguez stepped in smoothly. "Richard Johnson," she said, her voice flat now, official, you have the right to remain silent. But before we go there, I have one question, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. He glared at her, breathing hard. Can you walk? She asked. Every eye in the room fixed on him. His gaze darted from the tablet to me, to Eleanor, to Rebecca. This is ridiculous, he barked. Of course I can't walk. I'm paralyzed. Ask any of my doctors. Ask. Nathan swiped again. Up came a still frame, Richard in their kitchen at home, our home, standing at the counter making himself a sandwich, captured by the small camera Nathan had installed in the smoke detector weeks before. The room erupted. Swearing, gasping, someone sobbing outright. Phones appeared like flowers after rain, screens lighting as people hit record, their lenses drawn to the man in the wheelchair whose lie was crumbling in real time. Turn that off. Richard roared, red-faced. You can't, this is illegal, Amara, do something. There it was, the old reflexive tug, fix this, smooth it over, protect him. It died before it reached my hands. I already did, I said quietly. I told the truth. He tried to lunge toward me, forgetting himself. His body moved before his brain could stop it. He pushed off the armrests and stood. There was a collective intake of breath so sharp it felt like the room had been vacuum sealed. For a moment, he stood there unaided, legs locked, back straight, fury blazing in his eyes. No trembling. No collapse. Just a man so used to his own lie he'd forgotten which version of himself he was supposed to be inhabiting. Someone screamed. Eleanor's knees buckled, she dropped back onto the sofa as if she'd been struck. Patricia clapped a hand over her mouth. James swore under his breath. Richard realized too late what he'd done. His eyes went wide. He stumbled, half falling back into the chair. I lost balance, he stammered. Adrenaline. That doesn't mean anything, I can't. Agent Rodriguez didn't bother to argue. Richard Johnson, she said, stepping forward, you are under arrest for disability fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As she recited his rights, another agent appeared at her side, slipping cuffs around Richard's wrists. The metallic click echoed, absurdly loud over the ragged breathing in the room. Rebecca bolted for the hallway. She made it 3 steps before one of Rodriguez's colleagues blocked her path. Rebecca Grant, he said. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and medical misconduct. We've been waiting for you. She dropped to her knees, mascara streaking. This isn't fair, she sobbed. He said, he told me. Whatever story she tried to spin was swallowed by the sound of phones recording, guests whispering, Eleanor's low, broken moan. Richard tried to wheel away, the agent behind him locked the brakes. You did this, he hissed at me as they turned him toward the door. You ungrateful. I believed you, I said. For 3 years. That was my mistake. This is just the correction. They rolled him out past the cake, past the violinist clinging to his instrument like a life raft, past the banner that suddenly felt like a lie. Eleanor watched them go with a hand pressed to her mouth. When the door closed, she started to shake. I didn't know, she whispered, looking at me and really seeing me for the first time. Those messages, the recordings, he showed me things, Amara. You saying you wished he'd died, that you were tired of caring for him. He said you were cruel behind his back. I thought I was protecting him. Nathan stepped forward, producing another folder. Fabricated, he said gently. Edited from unrelated calls and texts. We've already turned the originals over to the authorities. Eleanor's shoulders crumpled. Oh my God, she breathed. What have I done? I should have felt triumph. All I felt was tired. I think, I said quietly, you've just been lied to by the same man I married. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. I'm so sorry, she said. For everything I let him do to you under this roof. If there is anything, I can do to make this right. At that moment, there wasn't. But later, there would be. The months that followed blurred into hearings, meetings with prosecutors, statements and signatures. Richard took a plea deal when he realized the case against him wasn't going away. So did Rebecca. They both received prison time, shorter than I would have liked, longer than they expected. In court, without the wheelchair, Richard looked smaller. The judge ordered restitution. The insurance companies were angry. The government agencies he'd scammed were angrier. His face appeared on a few local news clips, a disgraced consultant who'd faked paralysis for cash and sympathy. Eleanor attended every hearing. At the final one, she approached me outside the courtroom, hands shaking as she held out a thick envelope. I've liquidated some of Richard's trust, she said. The rest will go to paying back what he stole. This portion is for you. No strings. Consider it, overdue rent for the years you spent as his nurse in my son's house. I don't want his money, I said automatically. It's not his, she replied. Not anymore. And if you don't take it, I'll put it somewhere you can't refuse it. A scholarship fund, maybe. For women who had to start over after giving up everything to care for someone who didn't deserve it. That made me pause. She saw it. Help me set it up, she said. Name it. Shape it. Let me do one decent thing with what's left of this mess. In the end, that's what we did. The Amara Foundation for Caregiver Reinvention launched quietly 6 months later. Eleanor wrote the first check. I wrote the mission statement. We didn't become close, not in the movie montage way, but we became something unexpectedly solid, two women who'd both been manipulated by the same liar and refused to let that be the last chapter of the story. I signed the divorce papers without asking for spousal support. The lawyer blinked. You're entitled to. I'm entitled to my life back, I said. That's enough. Work came first, consulting projects, then a more permanent role helping companies untangle messy branding disasters. Turns out, years of navigating insurance jargon and medical bureaucracy makes you very good at cutting through corporate nonsense. I moved into a small apartment with big windows and terrible plumbing that I loved like a living thing. I bought furniture that didn't need to be arranged around a wheelchair. I hung prints I'd picked out myself instead of Eleanor's approved palette. Occasionally, I spoke at events about caregiver burnout and financial manipulation, small conferences, support groups, then eventually, bigger rooms. Every time I looked out at the faces of women and men who'd lost themselves in someone else's crisis, I felt that click of recognition. You're not crazy, my life said, just by existing. You're not alone. Somewhere along the way, I started saying yes to coffees that weren't work-related. To drinks with friends I hadn't seen since before the accident. To one particular date with a man who asked about my work before he ever asked about my past and listened carefully when I told him both. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, honest. On the 1-year anniversary of Eleanor's infamous birthday party, I left the office early. The city was warm, sunlight sliding down glass buildings, people streaming past in that hurried, alive way. I walked without thinking about it, body moving easily, no mental checklist of ramps and elevators and accessible entrances. At a crosswalk, my phone buzzed. How did the pitch go? It was from Daniel, the man from that coffee, now something more than someone I was seeing, though we hadn't figured out the exact word yet. We got it, I typed back. Celebrate dinner? You pick the place, he replied. Asterisk anywhere you want. No obligations, asterisk. I smiled, slipping the phone into my bag. For a long time, my life had been defined by what I owed, to Richard, to Eleanor, to the story I'd told myself about what a good wife was supposed to be. Now, standing on a busy city corner in a dress I'd bought for no one's approval but my own, I realized something simple and profound. I didn't owe anyone my ruin. The party that was supposed to destroy me had done the opposite. It had pulled the lie into the light, exposed every rotten piece, and left me with something rare and unsentimental. The chance to rebuild on truth. The walk signal flashed. I stepped off the curb into the sunlight, my own legs carrying me forward, my own choices shaping where I would go next. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next story.